The man who swept the steps. He swept the steps every morning. No one knew where he lived, or if he even did. He fixed heaters, found lost cats, helped with math, then vanished one snowy night. By the time they found his body, he'd already held them all together. Hi everyone, welcome to the Pillow Files. Let's get started. Harold Finch had been sweeping the steps at 57 Pine Street for as long as anyone could remember. The old brick apartment complex, its facade crumbling and bricks pitted by decades of winter salt and summer suffocation, leaned precariously on the edge of downtown Cincinnati. Its peeling paint was that familiar dull grey, and weeds thrust through the concrete slabs that served as a courtyard. Strings of Christmas lights, long dead, drooped from the eaves like forgotten cobwebs. The front porch steps, 6 of them, rose toward a pair of double doors that squeaked so loudly you could hear them half a block away. Every morning, dawn, dusk, or drizzle, Harold was there, broom in hand, sweeping leaves, discarded fast food wrappers, and whatever other debris had gathered overnight. He wielded a straw broom that had lost more bristles than he could count. The handle was splintered and smooth from constant use, the straw head misaligned and ragged. His brown coat, frayed at the edges, hung from his thin shoulders like a familiar uniform. He wore threadbare slacks and scuffed black shoes. His limp, pronounced in the way his right shoulder dipped, came from an accident no one ever asked about. Harold never spoke above a low murmur. He greeted tenants with a timid nod. Nobody ever saw him with a wallet or keys, and he never buzzed a sweet buzzer. You might assume he was a janitor or a handyman, but the building's lease agreement was in the landlord's name alone. No caretaker was listed, no superintendent. The landlord, Mr. Milton Graves, lived in Chicago, rarely visited, and collected checks by mail. How Harold ended up here, no one could say. He simply existed, like wallpaper, always visible, rarely noticed. The children called him Ghost Grandpa. In the winter, when the wind whipped beneath threadbare scarves and kids skidded across icy sidewalks, they heard his shuffling steps behind them as he swept stray snow into neat piles. They giggled when he tipped his head to look at them, then resumed sweeping. "He's going to disappear any day now," one child whispered. "He's a ghost, room to the sky." But he never disappeared. Eventually, they forgot to whisper and simply waved as they ran past him on their way to school. Adults nodded, said, "Good morning, Harold," as they shuffled inside. Some left him tip money, an old dollar bill, a pack of cigarettes. He refused them silently, leaving the gifts in a pocked bucket concealed beneath the steps. When a new tenant moved in, they'd ask, "Who's that old guy sweeping the steps?" Someone might reply, "Oh, he's just Harold. Lives here somewhere. Quiet as a mouse, hard to find." No one ever saw Harold at the mailbox. There were no letters under the door of his suite, if he had one. No odd packages stacked by his door. They assumed he didn't receive mail because whenever something arrived for Harold Finch, Birdie, the postal worker, tossed it into a special return-to-sender bin in her truck. She joked that Harold's mail route was straight to eternity, but her words never struck him. He never asked why, and no one volunteered an explanation. He wasn't listed as a tenant. He paid no rent, presumably, though the landlord never noticed or cared. The building had 7 floors, with 3 apartments each, 21 units total. The top floor had 1 suite, where a transient lived for a few months before vanishing, leaving unpaid rent behind. Another floor housed a recovering addict who came off heroin and then moved on to meth, disappearing in a haze of paranoia. Below were families who cycled through the housing authority waiting list, moving in as evictions chased out the previous occupants. Over the decades, the only constant was Harold, wearing that coat and sweeping those steps. But then, in February, the boiler broke. It was a bone-chilling night when the boiler in the basement sputtered its last breath. The tenants started noticing around dusk, when the radiators stopped hissing and their apartments chilled. On the 4th floor, Mrs. Lee, 82 years old and arthritic, thrust her arms through her nightgown to find socks. When she touched the porcelain of her bedside radiator, it was ice cold, She shuffled to her kitchen, rubbed her hands together in front of her microwave, her breath swirling in an icy fog. She called the maintenance line, left a message, and then called again. No answer. She called her daughter in Dayton, who promised to send someone to help, but the daughter was stuck in meetings. Mrs. Lee wrapped herself in a quilt and waited, eyes closed, the thought of frozen pipes making her shiver. On the second floor, a young couple, Ethan and Simone Watkins, huddled in sweatpants and fleeces. Their newborn baby, Maya, fussed in her bassinet, her tiny fists pounding the air. They swaddled her, rocked her every hour, glancing at the thermostat. 56 degrees. They bundled the baby in blankets and paced the apartment, uncertain what to do. They called their parents, who lived 4 hours away. They called 911, but dispatch told them it was a landlord's issue. They wrote a notice on Facebook asking if any neighbors knew how to fix boilers. No one replied immediately. Everyone was cold. On the first floor, Malik Ahmed, 10 years old, slept under an old down comforter. His mother, Shakira, worked 2 jobs, hospital cleaning by day, warehouse cashier by night. She had gone to her shift at 6 a.m., leaving Malik to get ready for school. That morning, he awakened shivering and covered to his chin. He tried calling her cell, but no answer. Cold seeped into his bones. He turned on the faucet, and the water was ice. He checked the heater, cold. He threw his uniform on and carried his backpack to the building's front door, slipping gloves from his pocket. Then he saw Harold. Snowflakes drifted from an overcast sky. The streetlight flickered below. The wind bit. Malik hugged his arms around himself as he slid down the steps. "Morning, Harold," he called, voice squeaky from cold. Harold's biscuit coat looked threadbare against the wind. He scraped his hands along the steps with his broom. "Morning, Malik," he said, voice barely above a whisper. The limp was worse in winter. Always cold, exacerbated by arthritis. "Cold inside," Malik said, rubbing his arms. "The boiler's out." Harold paused, leaned on his broom. "I'll see what I can do." He found 3 old space heaters in the basement's electrical closet, an orange oil-filled radiator, a cracked ceramic unit, and a beat-up tower fan with a heating coil. He lugged them up to each floor landing, plugged them into extension, cords that snaked through stairwells. He turned them on, warming the musty hallways. Tenants woke to trickles of heat under their doors. Mrs. Lee shuffled down the hallway to the landing, found her space heater humming. "Oh, Harold," she said, tears escaping. "Thank you." He gave a small nod, mouth compressed. He carried the smallest heater, an electric coil missing its plastic handle, up to Simpson's apartment on the 3rd floor. Simpson, a recovering victim of domestic violence, was out at group therapy. He placed the heater near the door, propped on a milk crate. He left a note taped to the door. "Use carefully. Love, H." Then he trudged back down 7 flights to reach his steps, still, sweeping away the last of the snow. News of Harold's heaters spread. When the landlord finally handed the copy of the diagnostics report to Birdie, he'd flown in a technician who said replacing the boiler would cost upwards of $15,000. The tenants realized how lucky they'd been. If not, for Harold, they might have been cold in the dark for days. That night, every tenant who could afford it threw $1 in a basket near the lobby's bulletin board. After Harold collected the cash, he bought lunch for Birdie, his only known friend. She shared her coffee, but he said, "Keep it safe. You'll need it for the cold." In late November, when the first snow crusted the sidewalks with ice, Mrs. Lee came down the steps wearing slippers, carrying a casserole dish. The metal handle was slick with melted snow. She lost her footing on the 5th step and crashed into the concrete. The windfall barked her shins against the pavement, shock freezing her to the bone. Passers-by heard her scream from behind the complex, but she heard nothing. Her head spun and her vision blurred. She heard footsteps, soft, careful, then a voice. "Mrs. Lee, are you all right?" She managed a shaky nod, the casserole dish clattering beside her. Harold knelt, helping her to her feet, then shuffled to the lobby to fetch the building's single functional wheelchair, left behind by a tenant who moved to Scottsdale. He wheeled her to the parking lot, where the Winnebago that had parked there all summer had finally left. He guided her across the icy patch to the sidewalk, hailed a passing taxi, and paid the driver to take her to the ER. He scribbled his name and phone number on a napkin, handed it to her. "Thank you," she whimpered, voice shaking. "Get some rest," he said, creeping back to the lobby, his breath a mist behind him. When she insisted on paying the taxi fare, he waved her off. "Keep your money," he said, "and rest." He returned to his broom in the lobby, swept the staircase dry from the snow. Harold's boots had tracked inside, and murmured to no one, "You'll be okay." Nobody saw him. 3 weeks later, the janitor's closet door clanged open. Harold had not been seen inside the building since the accident. Tenants assumed he was tending to someone else. Inside, Harold knocked gently on the metal door of Mrs. Lee's apartment. She opened it in hospital garb, leg in a cast, walker parked by her walker. She rose an arm to steady herself as he carried in groceries, canned soup, applesauce, fresh, rolls. "Mr. Finch," she said, choking back tears. "You didn't have to." He offered, a hesitant smile. "I know. I want to." She hugged him, the air heavy with winter. "God bless you." He shook his head. "More like God bless you." As he left, she noticed a small sealed envelope taped to her pantry door. "When I was your age, I never thought I'd learn kindness." She found it, cold tears in her eyes, wiping them on her robe. In mid-May, 2 months before school ended for the summer, young Malik struggled with fractions. From 5C, he sat at his desk, stare fixed on his textbook, 3/4 divided by 1/3. His mother was at the warehouse, relying on her paycheck to keep the lights on and the cable working. Malik furrowed his brow, pencil hovering over the page. He sighed, glanced at the clock, 7:32 p.m. No dinner in sight. His baby sister, barely a year old, cooed in her crib, fussing from wetness. He scooped her up, soothed her, then plopped her on his bed, giving her a stuffed rabbit to hold. He stared at the fractions again, uncomprehending. 3/4, 1/3, Arhol. The instructions were scrawled in the margin. Invert the second fraction. Multiply 3/4, x 3/1, 9/4. He scratched his head, yielding nothing. A knock came, light but deliberate. On the other side of the door, a familiar broom handle peeked through the crack. Malik swallowed. "Who is it?" he called. Harold's muffled voice drifted through. "Math help." "Malik?" Malik's eyes widened. "Mr. Finch, but it's late." He opened the door. In the hallway, Harold held an envelope in one hand, his other hand extended in greeting. "Can I come in for a moment?" Malik considered, then nodded, stepping aside. Harold shuffled in, letting the door close between them. "How's your mum?" "She's working," Malik said as he sat at his desk. "She had overtime." He turned to the textbook. "I can't do this." Harold knelt by the bed, smoothing a wrinkle from a sheet. The baby gurgled, then reached for Harold's coat. Harold touched his nose to her hand. She giggled. Malik sat back at the desk, silent. Harold placed the envelope beside him. "I sat with my books when I was your age. My father died when I was 8, and school was the only place I felt safe. But I struggled with fractions too." He opened the envelope, revealing a handwritten sheet of practice problems, lined fractions, each step written. Divide fractions, invert and multiply. Then 3 problems solved in pencil. The final line read, "You can do it." Malik's eyes filled. "You solved these?" Harold nodded. "I thought it might help." Malik thawed. "Thanks." He picked up a pencil, followed the steps. 3/4 times 3/1 equals 9/4, 2 1/4. Harold nodded, rising to his feet. "Exactly." He turned to leave but paused by the crib. "Is this your sister?" Malik nodded. Zoe. The baby cooed, grabbing Harold's wrist. Harold leaned over and whispered, "Beautiful name." His voice cracked. Malik realized Mr. Finch's hair had gone white. His limp was pronounced tonight. "Thank you," Malik whispered again. He left quietly. Malik, glancing always over his shoulder, worked on the remaining fractions until 16 pages lay completed. He slipped the sheet under the envelope and taped it to the door. "Thank you, Mr. Finch." Malik. The summer ended. Students returned to their classrooms. Tenants filed lease renewals or packed up to leave. Someone had posted about Harold on a local message board. "Who's that sweet old man in the brown coat who fixes everything around? Here?" A flurry of replies erupted. "He's the one who saved my grandmother's life. He helped my kid pass second grade math. He paid my cab fare after my bike broke down in the snow." Then the posts went quiet, until on November 17th, Harold did not sweep the steps. Snow fell overnight, a steady whisper turning the steps into a sheet of white. Tenants, wrapped in scarves and parkas, emerged to a silent building. No shuffling broom, no rustling coat. The snow blanketed the broom that lay abandoned by the door. In their apartments, residents peered out at the untouched snow, first annoyed, then puzzled. The lobby lights flickered. The cracked glass of the front door reflected the snowfall. No broom handle. No Harold. A hush passed through the courtyard. Something was wrong. Mrs. Lee, still in her walker, ventured down. She tapped the broom with her cane. "Harold," she called softly. No answer. She shuffled into the lobby, tried the door to the janitor's closet. Locked. She found the manager, a temp from the office, and informed him. He shrugged and called for a locksmith. The locksmith broke in. The closet revealed cleaning supplies and a pair of rubber boots. Footprints led toward the back door. Tenants called Mr. Graves, but he was unreachable. Calls to Birdie, the postal worker, generated no clues. The building fell into unease. Mrs. Lee's children insisted someone check on him every hour. Neighbors warmed themselves by electric fireplaces, furrowed brows pressing into scarves. Malik pushed Zoe through the courtyard in her stroller, draped in blankets. He scanned for Harold's brown coat, saw nothing. He wondered if the snow had sent him sliding down the steps. Midnight arrived. Parkers across the street turned off headlights, creating a cloak of darkness. The building's furnace sputtered, then kicked into life. Everyone was bracing for days without heat, but no one slept. Finally, at dawn, Mrs. Lee summoned the courage to knock on the door that she believed was his. Apartment 1B, the first apartment at the right. No answer. She turned the knob. Unlocked. The door drifted open. Behind it, in the living room, lay Harold, slumped in his armchair, his blanket still draped across his knees. The old straw broom lay against the wall. The dust-moted sunlight filtered through the curtained window onto his face, pale as a ghost's. His breathing had ceased. Mrs. Lee, stifling a cry, dropped to her knees. She touched his forehead. Ice cold. She pressed a button on his chest. No pulse. She rose, rushed to wave down an ambulance. 10 minutes later, paramedics pronounced Harold Finch dead at 3:17 a.m. Cause: congestive heart failure, age 93, no family. They took his body to the city morgue. The building's tenants stood outside in the courtyard, snowflakes melting on their hats, exchanging hushed words. Most had not known his last name, only Harold. News spread slowly at first. The landlord arranged a pauper's plot in the municipal cemetery. No next of kin. An obituary appeared in the local paper. 2 lines. Harold Finch, longtime resident of 57 Pine Street, passed away peacefully. No known family. Funeral arrangements pending. Birdie left a wreath outside the building's front door, placed by her fingertips as if she had just set it there. But the tenants that morning felt the emptiness. Malik stood by the steps. pressed his palm to the cold railing as though waiting for Harold to appear from behind a puff of breath. But no coat shuffled into view. He glanced at the empty closet door. He burned with guilt. Should have checked on him sooner. A few days later, Lara Andrews, tenant in 2B, a marketing copywriter, posted a remembrance on a neighborhood forum. Does anyone know what happened to Harold Finch? He was the man who kept our building together, always swept our steps, helped us in winter. I found out he passed. Nobody told us. He deserves better. Over the next 24 hours, replies cascaded. Memories of mugs of hot chocolate left on doorsteps, bandages applied to scraped knees, homework checks for Malik. A photo emerged. Harold studying with a child by day's break in the stairwell, a crooked grin as the sun haloed behind them, his limp, faint, no cane in sight until he placed a mat by the door. The captions, "Mr. Finch saved my grandmother's life when she fell, and he taught me math when my parents were at work." By evening, more than 50 people agreed to attend a memorial. 3 days later, on a snow-dusted Saturday afternoon, a makeshift memorial formed in the building's courtyard. The lobby doors stood open, revealing melts of candlelight and a floral cross leaning against the broom. Neighbors, young families, seniors, renters, and former tenants arrived bearing bouquets of daisies, small odes to Harold's quiet love. Malik carried Zoe in her snowsuit, pulling her along the icy bricks on a sled. Mrs. Lee hobbled with her walker, her heart trembling. Ethan and Simone Watkins, baby Maya in her stroller, placed a knitted blanket their baby had outgrown at the base of the cross. Lara Andrews, Red Cross volunteer, held the framed photograph upright. As the crowd grew, a pastor from a nearby church, Reverend Paula Simmons, stepped forward. Her voice carried over the hush. "We gather not to mourn alone, but to celebrate a life that gave so much without expectation of reward. Harold was our neighbor, our friend, our ghost grandpa, and he mattered." One by one, people stepped forward to tell their stories. Tenants who had moved away came back for the first time in years. One family from Louisville, whose teenage son was hospitalized for cancer, came to thank Harold for the letter he slipped under their door with words of hope. A former resident from 1983, a truck driver named Benny, told how Harold had kept extra jars of soup in his closet so that hungry college kids sleeping on couches could stay warm and fed. The patio echoed with laughter through tears as a college graduate from 10 years prior recounted the night Harold gave her cash so she could catch a bus to the city for a job interview. By dusk, the courtyard brimmed with more than 200 people, standing shoulder to shoulder, sharing blankets and hot cider. The candles flickered overhead, melting the snow at their bases as the vigil stretched on. The pastor ended with a prayer. "May we honor Harold by loving one another and seeing each other as he saw us." In the days that followed, a GoFundMe campaign launched by Lara Andrews raised enough money to supply heat for the next winter and to maintain the building's boiler. The landlord, shamed by the outpouring, hired a permanent superintendent to replace Harold's anonymous good deeds. The building was sold to a non-profit dedicated to affordable housing. Over 6 months, with state grants and private donations, the bricks were repaired, the staircase repointed, a new boiler installed. The lobby received fresh paint and polished floors. The broken elevators got replaced. The courtyard was turned into a small garden with raised beds for tomato plants, marigolds and daisies, Harold's favorites. A plaque was mounted at the base of the front steps. In honor of Harold Finch, 1931-2025. Swept us when we were adrift, warmed our winters, and taught us kindness. The bench outside the lobby, one of the few pieces of furniture he had left, now had a bronze plaque on its backrest. Harold Finch, the man who swept the steps. Tenants reserved seats there for birthdays, gatherings, or birthdays of those who had moved away. On hot afternoons, children wore down its paint, leaning on the backrest as they played tag. In winter, the bench bore wreaths of garland with red bows. To commemorate him further, Malik's middle school created the Finch Memorial Scholarship. Each year, an 8th grader from the building's neighborhood receives funding to attend high school. Perfect FAFSA form, sincere essay about why I matter. Malik and Zoe, now a teenager herself, judge essays. Each winner receives a copy of Harold's last letter. In 2030, the building was officially renamed The Finch. Its new awning bearing a stylized silhouette of a man sweeping leaves with a broom, flanked by children's doodles of daisies and geometric math equations. The residents threw a block party, and Birdie Kowalski, now retired from the postal service, took pride of place cutting a cake shaped like a broom with silver frosting. Children dunked themselves in a wading pool and painted faces with daisies. Old-timers, including Malik, now a junior in high school, stood on the steps and told the younger ones, this was Harold's place, treat it well. A photograph of Harold, taken years ago by Lara, hung in the lobby. Harold in his brown coat, broom in hand, standing on the steps as he always had, a gentle expression under his threadbare cap. Beneath it was a brief inscription. He was born a nobody, died a nobody, but in between, he held up an entire world that didn't even know it was leaning. In the summer evenings, when the sun dipped low and painted the sky amber, residents could be found on that bench, reading, chatting, or simply staring at the clouds. When someone felt unseen, a new tenant coming from out of state perhaps, they were told, take the window seat on the bench. Harold would have kept you company. Many did, and in the stillness of his absence, no one ever forgot. The steps stayed clean. The garden bloomed each spring. The scholarship opened doors for students. And the building, the Finch, stood firm in a once crumbling block, home to more than 400 souls who realized that one nobody could indeed matter to the entire world. Harold had swept the steps without question, his heart woven into each stroke of the broom. The dust he carried away was small, but the warmth he left behind was immeasurable. In their everyday struggles, rushed mornings, late-night arguments, unpaid rents, they discovered, at the edge of their awareness, that they weren't alone. They were part of something held together by silent acts of kindness. And that was Harold Finch's true legacy, a simple, sweeping promise that no one should ever be invisible. Love this story? Hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories that reveal the quiet power of kindness. Don't forget to check out the video currently on your screen. You won't want to miss what happens when a single moment changes everything. See you in the next one.